At midnight in the dimly lit corner store on Evergreen Street, a man who'd seen better days, Jonathan Green, watched quietly as a massive figure loomed at the counter. The biker, Sam Harris, towering over everyone with his patched jacket of the Red Raptors, was at the mercy of an indifferent cashier. Sam's deep voice echoed in the small store as he pleaded for milk he couldn't afford, his hands shaking slightly as he clutched his card, hoping for a miracle. With his daughter's health on the line, it was all he had left to offer. The buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead was almost deafening as the line of customers shifted uncomfortably, casting judgment on the rough-looking man in front of them. Jonathan stood in the far corner by the aisle of cereal boxes, his eyes keenly observant. He had spent the last 40 years watching life pass him by. At 58, he didn't carry the weight of his old self anymore, but it didn't mean the memories didn't linger. His once strong frame had grown lean and frail, and his clothes were as worn as the dreams he no longer dared to pursue. He knew what it was like to be on the other side of society's pity, the invisible, the forgotten. The murmurs from behind Sam only served as a reminder of how quickly people forgot the faces of those they couldn't see. Sam, oblivious to the growing tension in the store, turned to Sarah Evans, the cashier, with a pleading look. His words were strained. "Please, just one more time, can you try?" Sarah's face turned pale, and she tried again to swipe the card, her fingers trembling with uncertainty. The beep of rejection was the sound of defeat. "Sorry, sir, it's still not working. Is there another way to pay?" Sam's grip tightened on his wallet. His eyes darted to the growing, impatient line of customers, all now staring at him with thinly veiled disdain. Behind Sam, a middle-aged woman in a leather jacket shifted uncomfortably, and an elderly man shook his head, muttering to his companion. "Just like them," he muttered, loud enough for Jonathan to hear. "Look at him, probably here to cause trouble." The whispers were growing louder, like a storm on the horizon, and Jonathan felt the familiar sting of being judged. The same judgment had broken him once, and now it was trying to break someone else. Jonathan had lived through the whispers of small-town life, the ones that could build you up and tear you down with equal ferocity. Years ago, he had been a proud business owner of Green's General Store. His family had run the place for decades, providing everything from everyday groceries to gardening tools. It was a hub of the community, and he was respected. He could remember the days when he would walk into his store, greeted by the familiar faces of loyal customers who trusted him, his word, and the work he put into his business. But everything changed the day the shipment arrived. It was supposed to be routine, just another delivery of bulk goods to keep the shelves stocked, but that night, everything turned upside down. By the morning, half the inventory was missing. No signs of forced entry, no break-in. Just empty shelves and an entire inventory of goods gone. The police filed a report, the insurance was useless, and the rumors began. They whispered about him, about the missing products, about how he had been taking from the store. They painted him as a thief, a fraud, a liar. It didn't matter that there was no evidence. The whispers became truth in the eyes of the town. As his store crumbled, so did his life. His wife, Emily, who had stood by his side through it all, packed up and took their son, Ethan, to live with her sister in another state. "I can't keep watching you fall apart," she had told him, her voice thick with the weight of years spent holding on. The house was foreclosed, his store shut down, and Jonathan was left to wander, a shadow of the man he once was. He had been living on the streets for 3 years now, taking shelter wherever he could find it, whether it was behind a dumpster or in the alley by the corner store. Every night, he would curl up on the cold concrete, hoping for the morning to bring something different. It was on one of those nights, as he sat behind the store drinking what was left of his cold coffee, that he saw Sam struggling with his purchase. Jonathan's heart went out to the big man. He didn't know what it felt like to be a biker or to live a life that came with so much judgment, but he knew what it was like to be dismissed, to be seen as nothing more than the sum of your mistakes. Without a second thought, Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the last of his crumpled bills, $8 and some change, all he had left. They were soft from being folded and refolded too many times, damp from the morning rain, but it didn't matter. He walked up to the counter and placed the money next to Sam's basket of groceries. "I've got it," Jonathan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The store went still as everyone turned their attention to Jonathan. Sam stared at the money for a long moment, not sure whether to accept it or to refuse. "No, man, I can't," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Jonathan's hand didn't waver as he stood there, steady as the years of hardship had made him. "You can't," he replied simply. Behind them, Sarah stood frozen, unsure of how to respond to such a gesture. The line of customers, once impatient, was now completely silent. Jonathan could feel their eyes on him, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't the man with nothing. He was someone making a difference. Sam looked at Jonathan with gratitude, his voice rough. "I don't know what to say," he muttered. Jonathan looked up at the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces of those who had once judged him, and he felt a sense of resolve. You look at him and see a man in leather, someone who's a threat. You look at me and see a homeless man, someone you can ignore. But how many of you would empty your pockets for a stranger? The silence was heavy, each word carrying the weight of years of judgment and shame. Jonathan stood tall, feeling something shift within him. He was done being invisible. The people in line shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. "How many of you cross the street when you see me coming?" Jonathan continued. "How many of you push people down just to feel taller?" The words hung in the air, heavy with the truth no one wanted to face. Sam hesitated, then turned to Sarah. "Ring him up," he said quietly, still processing everything. As the transaction was completed, Jonathan stepped outside, the cool night air biting at his skin. Sam caught up to him in the parking lot, holding the bag of groceries tightly in his hands. He looked at Jonathan, his voice thick with emotion. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Jonathan paused, his hand resting on the door of the store. "Because someone should have done the same for me once." Sam, moved by the kindness, extended his hand. "Name's Sam," he said, a sense of vulnerability creeping into his tone. "Jonathan," Jonathan replied, shaking his hand. Two men, both judged by their covers. Before Jonathan could say anything else, a roar of engines filled the air. It was a low hum at first, but it grew louder, more distinct. Sam looked around, a puzzled expression crossing his face as the sound of hundreds of motorcycles grew closer. Jonathan looked up, and his eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The first bike rolled into the parking lot, gleaming chrome reflecting the streetlights. Then another, and another, until there were 50, then 100, and soon the entire street was lined with motorcycles. They roared like a tidal wave of leather and steel, each bike a testament to the brotherhood that had just been forged. Jonathan's heart raced as he stood in the middle of the chaos, trying to make sense of the scene. Sam's grin spread across his face. "Hope you don't mind the company, brother." Behind him, 300 bikers from across the country had gathered, each one a member of the Red Raptors. Their machines lined the street, a sea of roaring engines and gleaming chrome. Big Mike Morrison, the president of the chapter, dismounted from his bike and walked toward Jonathan with a commanding presence. "Jonathan Green," he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "What you did for Sam here, that wasn't just charity. That was brotherhood." Jonathan stood still, barely able to comprehend the magnitude of the moment. "We saw the way you helped him. You stood up for someone when no one else would," Big Mike continued, his voice heavy with respect. "And now we're here to give back. You're one of us now." Sam pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket and unfolded it. It was a blueprint of a building, a simple design with walls, a roof, and a door. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the lot. It was the old Green's General Store lot, the very place his dreams had crumbled. "We bought the lot," Big Mike said, "and we're giving it back to you." Jonathan couldn't speak, his mind reeling as Big Mike handed him the deed. "You've got a place with us now, brother. We're not just giving you a building. We're giving you back your name." The crowd of bikers erupted into cheers, their voices loud and strong. The community had gathered around him, watching as his world shifted once more. Within hours, construction had begun. The bikers worked like a well-oiled machine, each one with a role, each one contributing to something much bigger than themselves. Jonathan stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed by the love and respect pouring in from all sides. He had come from nothing, but now, in the midst of these 300 riders, he felt like he belonged. And in that moment, he understood. The $8 he had given to Sam was just the beginning. The kindness, the brotherhood, the justice, it was all coming back to him, in ways he had never expected. As the day wore on, More people from the neighborhood came by. Sarah, the cashier from the store, brought sandwiches. Mrs. Foster, the elderly woman who had always bought flowers from his shop, appeared with cold drinks. Slowly but surely, the people who had once avoided him were now offering their help. Jonathan felt the old familiar feeling return, the feeling of being part of something, of belonging. By the time the sun began to set, the New Greens General Store was beginning to take shape. The skeleton of the building stood tall, a symbol of resilience and second chances. Jonathan stood on the construction site, hammer in hand, knowing that this was his chance to rebuild not just his store, but his life. And as the bikers packed up to leave, Sam stopped by once more. "How you feeling, brother?" Sam asked with a smile. Jonathan looked out at the building, the engine sounds of the bikes fading in the distance. "Like I'm dreaming," he said, but he knew it was real. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the transformation of the lot was well underway. The towering presence of 300 motorcycles had left the town buzzing. Word had spread, and the ripple effect was more powerful than anyone could have imagined. People who had once avoided Jonathan now approached him, offering small tokens of goodwill. One by one, they had started to recognize that sometimes the smallest acts could create the biggest change. Sarah, the young cashier, was the first to approach Jonathan, her hands fidgeting nervously with the edges of her apron. "Mr. Green, I wanted to say I'm sorry," she stammered, looking at him with genuine regret. "For that night in the store, for not standing up for you. I just did my job, but I should have said something when people started whispering about you." Jonathan looked at Sarah, his eyes softer than they had been for years. She was barely more than a kid, trying to balance work and college. "You were doing what you thought was right," Jonathan said, his voice steady but kind. "The truth doesn't always make it easy, but it's never wrong." Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief, and she gave him a hesitant but sincere smile. Tom Bradley, the store manager who had once threatened to call the police when Jonathan was sleeping behind the store, came next. He stood awkwardly with a manila envelope in his hand. "Mr. Green," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I want to make things right. Here's a security deposit and the first month's rent. We've got a small section for you in my store if you ever want to sell tools again. It's not much, but it's yours." Jonathan was taken aback. His eyes went from Tom's outstretched hand to the envelope. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "After everything that happened?" Tom gave a small shrug. "Sometimes it takes something like this to remind us of what's truly important." Jonathan nodded, feeling the weight of the apology, the gesture, the realization that things could change. Even Dr. James Patterson, who had once been a loyal customer but had abandoned him during the height of the rumors, approached. He had tears in his eyes, but his voice was firm as he apologized for not trusting Jonathan. "I should have known better," he said. "I let the gossip make me doubt you. I believe in you now, Marcus. I'm sorry." Jonathan could feel the old wounds healing, but the scars would remain. It wasn't just about the apologies. It was about the undeniable proof that redemption was possible when people were willing to act on it. As the day stretched into the evening, Jonathan continued to work side by side with the bikers, hammering nails, lifting beams, and measuring out spaces. He was no longer just an observer in his own life. For the first time in years, he was part of something bigger, a force of change that was undeniable. By the time the sun set, the skeleton of the new store was up, the bones of what would soon be the rebuilt dream of Green's General Store. The community was beginning to gather around the construction site, their faces filled with curiosity, admiration, and even awe. The noise of hammers and the hum of power tools mixed with the occasional chatter from the crowd that had gathered to witness what had become a modern-day miracle. As the bikers packed up their gear and prepared to leave, Big Mike Morrison, the leader of the Red Raptors, approached Jonathan once more. He was holding something in his hands, something wrapped carefully in black leather. "Before we go, Jonathan, there's one last thing we'd like to give you," Mike said, his voice steady and commanding. Mike unfolded the leather carefully to reveal a black vest, worn and soft from years of use. Jonathan's eyes widened when he saw the embroidered patches. It was a Hell's Angels vest, but it wasn't the usual club patches that adorned it. Instead, the words "Honorary Brotherhood" were stitched across the top, and beneath them was a single word, "family." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat as Mike extended the vest toward him. You stood up for one of ours when the world wanted to tear him down, Big Mike said, his voice rich with respect. That makes you family. You're one of us, forever. For a long moment, Jonathan stood frozen, unsure whether to accept it or not. He had never imagined a day where he would be standing here, not just as a man who had lost everything, but as a man being accepted into a brotherhood that had once seemed so foreign to him. He reached out, his fingers trembling as he took the vest from Mike's hands. As Jonathan slipped the vest on, it fit perfectly across his shoulders, the leather soft against his skin. The weight of it was heavy, but it wasn't just physical. It was a reminder that, despite all the pain he had endured, he was still capable of finding connection, of finding family. The crowd that had gathered, including the bikers and the community members, began chanting, "Speech! Speech!" The calls rang out, and for a moment, Jonathan hesitated. He wasn't the type to speak in front of large groups, not after everything he had been through. But today was different. Jonathan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He cleared his throat, the noise from the crowd slowly dying down. "I don't know what to say to people who give everything to a stranger," Jonathan began, his voice stronger than he expected. 3 days ago, I was a man you walked past without even seeing. I was invisible to most of you. But today, I stand here, surrounded by brothers and a community that has proven that kindness is real, that there's still hope, and that we're all capable of making a difference. He gestured to the frame of the new Greens General Store, still under construction. This isn't just a building. This is proof that one simple act, one gesture of kindness, can change everything. It's proof that brotherhood is alive, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is stand up for someone when the world is ready to knock them down. Jonathan paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces before him. He saw not just the bikers who had come to his aid, but the people from his community, people who had once written him off. "I spent $8 on groceries for Sam because someone should have done the same for me once," Jonathan continued. "What you've given me today, this store, this community, is not just a second chance. It's someone finally doing the same for me." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the streets. The roar of engines filled the air as the bikers revved their motorcycles, each one nodding in respect as they rode off into the night. Jonathan stood in the center of it all, feeling something inside him shift, a recognition that the past had shaped him, but it didn't define him. And as the sun began to set, Jonathan Green understood that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. And sometimes, all it takes is $8 to buy back everything you thought you had lost forever. 6 months later, Green's General Store hummed with life. The shelves were stocked with tools, snacks, and home goods. The bell above the door jingled with each customer that walked in. It wasn't just a hardware store anymore. It was a place where people gathered, where stories were told, and where trust had been rebuilt. Jonathan stood behind the counter, wearing his Hell's Angels vest with pride. His hands moved with ease as he helped customers, the familiar rhythm of work returning to his life. Mrs. Chun, the young woman who had once worked at Murphy's Corner Store, came in with a shopping list, asking for help with her kitchen repairs. "You know," Mrs. Chun said, glancing around the store, "I never thought I'd see this place back in business. Not like this." Jonathan smiled, his heart full. "It's not just the store that's back," he said. "It's the community. We're all in this together now." At the back of the store, Marcus' son, Ethan, walked in with a bike that needed fixing. "Dad, can you fix this?" he asked, his face lighting up with the kind of confidence Jonathan hadn't seen in years. As Jonathan knelt down to fix the bike, he saw the future, a future where the lessons he had learned could be passed on to his son. And as he handed the repaired bike back to Ethan, the community outside felt like home. As the door chimed once more, Jonathan's eyes met Sam's across the counter. The two men shared a smile, the bond they had forged still strong. They had both been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild their lives, one small act of kindness at a time. And in that moment, Jonathan Green knew that sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand up for another to change the world. The bell above the door rang softly, and the world outside felt just a little bit kinder.